Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made for Stamp It Like It's Hot. I'm posting this video late. I just couldn't get my act together to finish the layout and the video in time, but I am really excited about this particular layout. I had a lot of fun making it, so I wanted to share it with you. Each month, Stamp It Like It's Hot has a prompt, and this month the prompt is to use a stencil as a stamp. So this is step one. I'm creating the background on which I'm going to stamp. I have a couple of different sprays that I put aside for this layout. Some of these are Tim Holtz Halloween colors. They are the Distress Mica Stains. I used several different colors. I used Fortune Teller, Ominous Twilight, and Hocus Pocus. And I like the way these were different shades of purple. I also wanted to use a little bit of a lighter color purple, so I used a Shimmerz Spritz called Sweet Pea. And then I also used a Distress Oxide Spray called Seedless Preserves. And I don't really have a strategy to what I'm doing. I'm just adding the sprays to the background and adding a little bit of water in most cases, and then using a piece of packaging to move those sprays around the background. Right now, I think that the colors look separate, but then as time goes on, they start to kind of meld together and create a more cohesive background. My shimmer sprays I use all the time. These Tim Holtz sprays, it's terrible. I bought them. I was so excited when I bought them, and I was just now taking the plastic off of some of them because I've had them in my stash for a while, or at least some of them, and I never use them. So I was really happy to get the opportunity to use all these different shades of purple and to just kind of work in a free manner where I wasn't too concerned about any particular technique. I'm just taking all the sprays, spraying them on the background paper, and just kind of see what happens. The paper that I'm using is the paper that I use for pretty much all of my mixed media layouts. I'm using 120-pound smooth white cardstock that I've coated with some Liquitex gesso. The paints are all very different. I wasn't sure how they were going to work together. After I put all of these sprays on the background, it did take a very long time for some of them to dry. I'm pretty sure those were the Tim Holtz sprays. I don't know if I just had so much color on my background or if the mixture of different types of paints caused that to happen, but eventually all of the paints did dry. So now I'm doing one of my favorite techniques, which is sprinkling some water on the background and then rolling a piece of paper towel on top to lift up some of the color. I love the effect that this creates. It almost has a cosmic or outer space look to it, but this layout is going to be Halloween themed. So I like the way those water droplets are different sizes. I think it gives a cool look, but it's not going to be a layout that has to do with space. So this is my method of adding some stamping using a stencil. I am using two brayers. One I use to spread the white paint on the stencil, and then the other one is clean. I use that to press the stencil down against the paper. And this got a little bit messy, as you could see. The brayer that was supposed to have the white paint on it got a lot of purple mixed in, and then the clean brayer didn't stay clean for very long. So I'm cleaning up in between each application. And I wasn't sure if you could really see this impression on the background, but I asked a few family members and they were able to tell that it was a spider web. So I decided that even if it was a little bit subtle, I was going to give it a try, and hopefully I would have a background that I was happy with by the end. So you can see that I later tried using a paintbrush to spread the color around. And then I also cleaned off my brayer on some occasions just to make sure that I wasn't spreading around white paint unless it was on the stencil. So I cleaned up my glass tabletop. Now I'm using a paintbrush to paint the stencil. I'm not going to move the stencil around. That was one mistake that I was making earlier. I'm leaving it in one spot and painting the entire stencil with the white paint. And then I'm going to flip it over on my layout. And then I'm going to use, again, a clean brayer and press it down. And I was really happy with these impressions. Like I said, they were a little bit more subtle than I thought they might be, but I do really like them. And then I had another stencil that was similar, but the spider webs were a little bit smaller. And this one is from Echo Park. It's called Spider Cobwebs Stencil. The other stencil, I believe I got that from AliExpress or Temu, one of those places. And I really like that stencil too. I think that the two together were a nice combination. And now I'm adding some white splatters using some watered down white acrylic paint. I already have that splatter look in the background, but I did want to add a few splatters of white paint. And then I thought that I should add a few splatters of black paint as well. And I'm glad I added the black splatters because the next day I decided that I was going to add some more stamping to the background. So the black splatters went along well with the stamping that I did in black. To add some stamping to the background, I used a Tim Holtz clear stamp set. I looked over the whole package. I didn't see any name or anything that would identify it, but it was a Stampers Anonymous stamp set. It's one of those ones that comes with stencils, or one stencil, but there are two different patterns on the stencil. And even though it wasn't a Halloween themed pack, it had a number of stencils that I thought would be very appropriate for a Halloween layout. There were some letters. That's the first stamp that I used. That's to the right of my layout right now. There were also some stamps that had dots on them and a crackle look to them. And I really liked that whole combination of those three stamps. So I went back and forth between the three of those and added lots of stamping to the background. At this point, I really had no idea of what my composition was going to be or even exactly which photos I was going to use. So I'm not strategically placing the stamping. I'm just stamping the background in a way that I think looks pleasing to the eye. Of course, a lot of the stamping that I put in the background gets covered up by my photos and my embellishments. I have to say it was pretty fun to just freely stamp on the background. I wasn't really worrying about where I was putting anything. One thing that I did try to keep in mind was that I wanted to keep the stamping in certain areas. I didn't want the whole background to have stamping on it. So I picked some areas at random and I used all three stamps in those areas and kind of built up the stamping in certain places, and then other areas I didn't stamp in at all. And I'm not saying this is the right way to do it. There are so many different ways to create a stamped background, but that's what I was thinking as I was creating this background. I wanted to mention that when I did the stamping with the stencil, I used thick body acrylic paint. And then for the stamping in black that I'm doing right now, I used Staz On ink in jet black. I like to use the Staz On ink or archival ink because I never know if I'm going to add more mixed media later, and those inks won't run if you add anything on top. So just to be safe, I like to use those inks when making a mixed media background. So these are going to be my two photos. They're both photos of my daughter, Julia, and she was all dressed up for Halloween. I have to be honest, I have to ask her what her costume was. It's something that I'm not familiar with just because I'm so much older than her. What she was dressed as was probably well known to all of her friends, but you know, I'm a little older and I don't recall, but I will find out because I do want to make a note of it, at least on the back of the layout, so that we'll remember that. So I'm using a Halloween collection that I love and I hoard like crazy. I absolutely love the Basic Gray Eerie collection. This is another collection that I absolutely love. It's a Brenda Walton Halloween collection, and it's really, really old. And I try not to spend too much money because some of these embellishments go for a lot of money online. But when I see them at a reasonable price, I do like to pick up the embellishments. And whenever I can find the papers, I like to pick those up too. Those are pretty hard to find at this point, but I really love them. And so I'm trying not to hoard them. So I used a piece of pattern paper, the orange diamonds, to back both of my photos. And then before that, I backed both of them with some scraps of off-white paper that I had in one of my scrap envelopes because I didn't want to use white. I felt like a bright white wouldn't kind of match with the other colors in this layout. I have my two photos. This is how I'm going to arrange them at a slight angle and slightly overlapping each other. One of the embellishments was a pack of borders, so I pulled out one of the acetate borders. I feel like these borders were so in style years ago, but they are really cool. I also found this scrap of paper when I was looking through that scrap envelope looking for something to mount the photos on, and I thought that this matched in really nicely with the collection. It's a scrap of my mind's eye lost and found paper, so I ripped it along the edge. Now I'm using my scissors to distress the edge, and I have two pairs of scissors that I use for distressing, and I try not to use my good scissors. I don't want to ruin them, so I like to have dedicated scissors for distressing. I could, of course, use my distress tool, but that takes a little bit longer to find, so I usually just grab these scissors. After I distressed and inked this strip of paper, I used my T-square to make sure it was straight. And then I wanted to fill in that spot between this strip of paper and the photo that's on the right, since that one's a little bit higher on the page. And I used this piece of paper that I ripped off the end of the larger strip of paper. And in the end, I really didn't like having the stripe on top of the stripe, so I'm going to play around with that in a little while. Once again, I'm using my T-square to make sure that the acetate border is straight, and then I attached that down. Now I'm using several embellishments from the Brenda Walton collection. I have a large green oval at the top of both photos, and I really like that, but I ended up switching it out just because I thought that that green just totally drew your eye to that one spot, and I didn't have a lot of that to use on the rest of the page, so I decided against using that oval even though I really like it. And then I used a couple of chipboard embellishments. I have one pack of chipboard. I try to make sure that I use it sparingly, but I'm trying not to hoard it. So I got a couple of those pieces on the layout. The Happy Halloween piece that's in the upper left-hand corner, that's a piece of chipboard. And so is the piece that says Fright Night. I just picked that up and put it at the top of the two photos. And then the other embellishments are all from the ephemera pack. Earlier, I cut that acetate border strip, and there was a small piece left over, so I decided to attach that to the bottom of the chipboard piece, and that's actually going to serve as my title. I also had a pack of banners that went with the collection, so I chose Haunted to put underneath the two photos. And then I'm inking the edges of a number of the pieces that I'm putting on the layout with some Distress ink in Vintage Photo. I didn't ink all the pieces because some of the pieces were black and I didn't think there was any point in inking the edges, but anything that was that off-white kind of grungy color, I inked the edges of those. I do make a number of small changes, but for right now, I'm going to attach down all of the elements exactly where you see them on the layout. And then later on, I'll do some switching of some of the embellishments that I wasn't crazy about. The cluster that's at the bottom of the photos was giving me a little bit of trouble. I couldn't get the items arranged exactly the way I wanted them. So in the end, I'm going to take away that circle that says trick or treat and just use the embellishments that I have there other than that one. I added some little bat stickers. Those don't stay on the layout either, but I do use something very similar. I have some epoxy dots that go with the collection, so I picked out an orange beetle and I placed it on the lower left-hand side of the layout. I thought I could use a little bit of orange in that spot. And then I cut this piece out of the pattern paper that I used to back the photos. On the other side, there were some potion labels. So I cut one of them out. I'm distressing the edges and I'm removing that green oval. I tried that out there. I didn't really like the way that looked either. So I'm going to use this bat. I had cut this bat out of a treat bag and I really liked the way it looked. It's metallic. So I fussy cut that bat from the treat bag, and the treat bag was also from the Brenda Walton collection. Not sure why they had treat bags mixed in, but I guess they were trying to diversify their Halloween paper and embellishments there. And I attached that behind the photos. Now I'm rearranging some of the elements at the top. I have that epoxy piece that's a spider with a green background. And this is where I decided that I did not like the way that strip of paper looked underneath the photo, so I flipped it over. And then when I flipped it over, I had to re-distress the edge and re-ink the edge as well. And I think that that looks a little bit better than the striped paper. It just didn't quite make sense when you looked at it to have a small area of striped paper and then more striped paper, but not exactly lined up right underneath it. So I like the way it looks now. Now I'm going to attach down the banner. The banner is a sticker, but it also has some very tiny brads on either side. So I use a paper piercer from a really old Making Memories set that I still use all the time with the eyelet setter. And I poked some holes where the ends of the banner were to put those very tiny brads through. And then I put those small embellishments back in place. One says October 31st and one says Poison Caution. And a little bit more inking to the edge of that piece of paper that I flipped over. And then I distressed the edge a little bit just to make it look a little bit more grungy. On that same treat bag, there were some littler bats, and you can see that I replaced the bat at the top of the pictures with the exact same bat, but this time I left the white border. I know I said how I didn't want to use white on this layout, but I really didn't like the way that bat just faded right into that very dark background, so I decided to go ahead and leave a white border, but just on those bats. I don't know if you could tell, but the bats, all of them, have a really cool shiny metallic look to them, almost like a copper color. So I thought that would look kind of cool mixed in with the colors that I already have on the layout. I like the idea of having some metallic colors on Halloween layouts. And then I love to add photo corners, so I use a small pad that I have so that I wouldn't waste any of the larger papers, and I punched out some green photo corners. It's funny, I don't have any scraps of this collection, even though I've had it for many years. I think that I've just used it so carefully, and I think any scraps that I had, I used to make other layouts. I don't want to waste even the tiniest little bit of the papers or any of the embellishments in this collection, so I'm being very careful. So I used a photo corner punch. I punched out some photo corners. I inked the edges with the Distress ink. I attached them down. And then I used some jewels to embellish the layout. I put some purple jewels on the photo corners and some green ones on the banner. And that's the last touch. The layout is complete. And here are a few close-ups. Please take a look in the description box. You'll find a link to the playlist for Stamp It Like It's Hot. There are so many fantastic videos on this playlist. I really recommend that you check it out. And if you're like me, you might start using stamps on your layouts a little bit more. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun making this layout. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.